The interrogation room hummed with a low, fluorescent thrum. It cast everything in a sickly yellow light, amplifying the shadows that clung to the corners. Rain lashed against the one-way glass, blurring the outside world into an abstract watercolor. I sat stiffly, my tailored suit suddenly feeling too formal, too constricting. My client, notorious art thief Julian Thorne, hadn't arrived yet. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This case, defending Julian, went against every fiber of my being. He was arrogant, dangerous, everything I usually avoided. Yet I couldn't deny the undeniable pull I felt toward him. It was reckless, foolish, and entirely unprofessional. A shadow fell across the two-way mirror, sending a shiver down Samantha's spine. Her breath hitched. Was it Julian? Or was it Detective Marc Laurent, the man assigned to the case, and the man who seemed determined to get under her skin? Either way, she was in too deep. This case had become more than just work. It was a dangerous game, and the stakes had never been higher. The door swung open, its hinges groaning a mournful protest. My gaze snapped towards the sound, my pulse quickening. Julian Thorne strolled in, a smirk playing on his lips. His tailored suit did nothing to hide the lean muscle beneath. His eyes, the color of aged whiskey, met Samantha's, and a jolt shot through her.
Miss Davies, looking forward to our little tete-a-tete.
Mr. Thorne, always a pleasure. Samantha managed, hating the tremor in her voice. Julian settled into the chair across from her, his gaze lingering on her a beat too long.
Cut the formalities, darling, Julian.
He leaned back, his confidence almost tangible. He knew the effect he had on her, and the bastard reveled in it. Despite her better judgment, despite the danger he represented, Samantha found herself drawn to his fire. He was everything she shouldn't want, yet she couldn't deny the heat that flared to life within her. Days blurred into nights. Strategy sessions with Julian were a delicate dance on the edge of a knife. His arrogance was infuriating, his audacity breathtaking. They argued, debated, challenged each other, and with every clash, the air between them grew thicker, charged with an unspoken tension.
You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment, Miss Davies.
This isn't personal, Mr. Thorne. Samantha's voice was clipped, even as his proximity sent shivers down her spine. But it was personal. The lines were blurring, and she was losing herself in the intoxicating danger of Julian Thorne. He was her client, and yet she craved his touch, his gaze, his very essence. It was wrong, forbidden, and yet she couldn't pull away. His arrogance was a challenge, his dangerous aura an aphrodisiac. Samantha was in over her head, drowning in the depths of a passion she couldn't afford to feel. Adding fuel to the fire was Detective Marc Laurent. He watched their every interaction, his gaze sharp, assessing. His presence was a constant reminder of the precariousness of Samantha's situation. He made it clear he saw right through her carefully constructed facade, saw the truth she desperately tried to hide.
He's playing you, you know,
Mark would say, his voice low, his eyes filled with a concern Samantha couldn't decipher. He's my client, Samantha would snap back, hating the flicker of guilt that twisted in her gut. Mark's presence was a complication she didn't need. He represented the law, the very thing she swore to uphold. He was duty, responsibility, everything Julian wasn't. And yet, there was something in his steady gaze, in the way he saw right through her, that stirred a different kind of fire within her. Samantha was caught in a web of her own making, torn between the dangerous allure of Julian and the quiet strength of Mark. The stakes were rising, and she was running out of time. The inevitable happened on a night drenched in the scent of rain and desperation. The pressure of the case, the constant push and pull between Julian and Mark, had driven me to the edge. I found myself at Julian's door, my hand trembling as I knocked. He opened the door, his eyes widening a fraction at the sight of me.
Miss Davies, to what do I owe the pleasure?
Don't, I breathed, my voice raw with emotion. Just don't. And then I was in his arms, his lips crashing down on mine. The kiss was a storm of need and desperation, a blurring of lines I could no longer pretend to see. He tasted of whiskey and danger, and I was lost. In that moment, there was no right or wrong, no lawyer and client, no Detective Laurent watching from the shadows. There was only the consuming fire of Julian and the terrifying realization that I was in freefall. His apartment was dimly lit, the air thick with unspoken tension. The kiss deepened, our bodies moving together as if we were two halves of a whole. His hands were on my back, pulling me closer, molding me against him. I could feel the heat of his body, the strength in his arms, and I was powerless to resist.
This is wrong.
It feels right. And in the depths of that stolen moment, lost in the intoxicating heat of his embrace, it did feel right. All the doubts, the fears, the knowledge that this was a dangerous game we were playing, faded away. There was only Julian, his touch, his scent, his desire a tangible force around us. The weight of our actions, the consequences that awaited us, seemed to melt away in the heat of the moment. We were playing with fire, and neither of us was willing to back down. The morning after was a study in contrasts. The guilt hit me with the force of a tidal wave, leaving me shaky and breathless. I had crossed a line, shattered the professional barrier that separated me from Julian. The weight of what I had done threatened to crush me.
You're quiet this morning, Miss Davies.
Don't make this harder than it already is. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the memory of our encounter a ghost that lingered between us. The lines were blurred beyond recognition, and I was caught in a web of my own making. The trial loomed, a dark cloud hanging over our heads. The courtroom felt suffocating, the air thick with anticipation. Julian, ever the showman, played his part to perfection. He was charming, charismatic, and I hated myself for the flicker of pride that stirred within me. Mark's presence was a constant weight on my chest. His gaze followed my every move, his eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and something else, something that looked suspiciously like betrayal. He knew about Julian and me, and the knowledge hung between us, a tangible barrier.
You're making a mistake.
He's innocent. The walls seemed to be closing in, the weight of my deceit crushing me. I was in too deep, entangled in a web of lies and forbidden desires. The line between right and wrong had vanished, and I was lost. The verdict came as a shock. Not guilty. Julian was free. As the courtroom erupted in chaos, our eyes met across the room. His lips curved into a slow, triumphant smile, and I felt a chill run down my spine. He had won, but at what cost? The victory felt hollow, the price I'd paid too high. I had betrayed my principles, risked everything for a man who thrived on chaos. And now, as Julian walked free, I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. Mark watched me, his expression unreadable. He didn't say a word, but his silence spoke volumes. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with the consequences. The future stretched before me, uncertain and daunting. One thing was clear. My life, once predictable and safe, would never be the same again. I had looked into the eyes of the devil and found myself wanting more. And in the end, that was the most terrifying realization of all.